Hello, welcome to the second module of MOOC's course Vine and Wine. I'm Joe Haynes. I am a master's student for viticulture and enology on the vinifera program at Montpellier Supergros, and I'm joined today by three professors, Professor Christian Charvat from Toulouse, Professor Gregory Gambetta, and Professor Kees van Leeuwen from Bordeaux. Welcome. To start us off today, we have a few questions here. First of them, could you please detail the Guyot poussard and Guyot pruning methods? And I think Professor Charvat, could you go into that?
Okay. Regarding the Guyot, it's a type of pruning that is necessary when you have fruiting buds quite far from the old shoot. From the old wood. So that's why people are using it in some cases, and it's also more productive in some cases than spur pruning. There is another question regarding poussard, which is a sort of extension of the Guyot pruning. This one is a bit complex. I put a link on the discussion thread. It's poussard. It's maintaining the sap flux by always pruning the spur on the bottom of the arm, and the long shoot would be on the top, and the most damaging wound when cutting the long shoot every winter would be on the top. So that's where sometimes there can be vascular blockage, and so that maintaining the sort of flow on the bottom make your vine life longer.
I was wondering if Kees knew where the origin of the Guyot you saw.
No, I actually don't know the origin, but it's becoming more and more popular because it seems to be a good way to reduce the impact of wound diseases by reducing the pruning of wounds and by respecting the sap flow. So from a practical point of view, if you apply Guyot poussard, it's like a Guyot sample. So you have two spurs, one on either side, and one cane. And from a practical point of view, any time that you leave a spur, you leave it on the lower part of each arm. So you have two arms, and on each side of each arm you have a spur on the lower part of the arm, with the first bud regarding downward. So next year you will prune another spur on that bud regarding downward. So that means that you have the spurs from one year to the other, always in line and on the same part of the arm, the lower part. And that's probably the reason why you have less pruning wounds and so less impact of SK dieback.
Brilliant.
Just a remark. Maybe you know the answer, Kees or Greg. I know that mechanized pruning is becoming more popular. I know that there were trials in mechanizing the Guyot. Have you heard about that? And any chance that the Guyot poussard can be mechanized, or it's really too complex?
It seems very. I don't think it's possible. But even Guyot, I'm very skeptical if ever Guyot can be mechanized. So mechanization is typically for spur pruning. But,
Interesting. Thank you very much. The next question is slightly different. Do any of you know the etymology of acrotony?
I have no idea. Neither do I, but I think with a bit of internet research, very important question in terms of viticultural management.
I looked at it, but it's no clear answer on the internet. Very confusing. Acrotony is top, mesotony is bottom, and basotony is mesotony is middle, and basotony is bottom. I mean, the tendency of spur growing faster on the top when it's acrotony and so on. But really, I don't know whether
it's tropical acropole was on the top of the hill, so
yeah, that's it.
yeah.
Acro is probably the head or something like that. Yeah.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you. And perhaps Professor Gambetta or Van Leeuwen, would you be able to detail for me stomatal conductance?
Well, it's actually really simple. Stomatal conductance it's simply a non-technical way of putting it is it's a measure of how open the stoma or the stomata are on the leaf. So when the gases are going in and out of a leaf, is the stomata open or closed? You know, technically, the units of it are how much gas gets exchanged. We can have a stomatal conductance. We can talk about CO2, or we can talk about water. How much gas flows in and out of that stomata per unit time per pressure gradient. This is what the units of a conductance are. But practically speaking, I think the students should just think of it as how open are stomata. Are they wide open, allowing water to escape and CO2 to come in the most freely possible? Or are they closed, meaning that they limit
high conductance would mean that the stomata are open.
Exactly. A big number means the stomata are open to their maximum capacity. Well, that depends. Actually, that's the answer to all scientific questions. It depends. It depends on the paper, but it's an amount of water per unit time per
area.
Per area, yeah.
Fantastic, thank you very much. And when talking about this potential, the potential in irrigation, it's often used the term the pre-dawn potential. Is that literally early in the morning, or is that before flowering?
Yeah, I can answer this question if you want. So it's literally in the morning. The point is you can water potential is the potential of water in an organ in the vine, which is globally speaking a very good indicator of water status. And for practical reasons, generally you use a leaf to measure the water potential because you could do it on a bunch or on a shoot, but it's easier to do it on a leaf for practical reasons. And the pressure chambers are designed to receive a leaf. Now, you can measure water potential during the day, but the water potential of a particular leaf is not very stable during the day because during the day stomata can be open or closed. When the stomata are open, the leaves are losing water. At the same time, there's water coming into the leaves because the roots pick up the water. So you're in a sort of state which is not very stable. And also, the water potential of a particular leaf during the day depends very much of the microclimatic conditions of that particular leaf. So that means that a sun-exposed leaf would not have the same water potential than a leaf in the shade. And that makes the interpretation of the water potential during the day quite complicated. Now, one way to overcome this problem is to measure it during the night, particularly at the end of the night. Because during the night, when there's no sunlight, the stomata are closed. So that means that in your leaf, you have water coming in from the soil, but no water coming out. So that means that after a couple of hours during the night, the water potential in the leaf is totally stable. And of course, there's no sunlight and no shade during the night. So you can pick whatever leaf on your vine and you obtain basically the same value. So it's much easier for interpretation to do it in the night. Of course, it's more constraining. And you need to do it rather at the end of the night, rather than at the beginning of the night, because it takes a few hours, in particular in stressed conditions, to reach that equilibrium. So typically, it's done at 3 or 4 a.m., just before dawn, and that's why it's called pre-dawn. So that there's not, the question was, is it before flowering or whatever? You can do it over the whole season. You can start at flowering and do measurements until harvest. But doing it pre-dawn is a very good way to measure water potential. And for irrigation management purposes, a good rhythm is to do it, say, once every week or once every 10 days. have a value and to. It's actually one of the best ways to monitor irrigation. It's a very, very reliable tool.
Okay, thank you very much. Would any of you be able to outline for me the Verdi model for soil maintenance?
Neither am I.
No? Okay.
Christian, what it means, Verdi model?
Oh, I prefer you. I mean, relation soil plant. I guess you might be the best. Yeah, in terms of that.
I'm not familiar with that. Neither am I.
No. Okay. Well, moving on.
You have to look on the pad. We asked the prof. Maybe that's a girl from Montpellier who's doing the video on that. Maybe we ask her to answer the question on the discussion thread.
Okay. Thank you. Moving on. With regards to drip irrigation, it being one of the most efficient methods, which reduces water consumption by up to 15% compared with other methods, what's the most accurate number in terms of how much it actually does reduce water usage, or is it very variant by vineyard to vineyard?
This is a good question because I was responsible for writing that figure. And when I wrote 15%, it's funny, the question is, in the book, it specified 50%. It depends which book you look at. And it can vary depending on how efficient the irrigation is. So the reduction or the increase in water efficiency that you get from drip can vary. It can vary probably from some percentage at saving as much as 15%. The figure that I got was from California State and the University of California, and studies that they had done. But of course, it does vary.
Okay.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think it can be up to 50% if you compare to flooding. With flooding, you use a lot of water, and if you compare drip to flooding, and moreover, when you use drip irrigation, you know exactly where you apply your water, and it's more uniformly spread over the block. If you use flooding, then of course the water goes to the lower parts of the block, and particularly the parts of the block where you maybe don't even need irrigation. So drip irrigation is not only a way to save water, but also to have a more uniform pattern of irrigation over the block. And even if there's some heterogeneity in the block, you can possibly close some irrigation lines and only apply water where you exactly need it. So. There's also a drawback of drip irrigation, which is that you can have specific root development at the location of the drippers, which can make the vines very dependent on the irrigation. If you have very shallow root development and around the drippers, and to overcome that problem, the best strategy if you use drip irrigation is to apply significant amounts and then withhold the water for say 1, 2, or even 3 weeks, so that when you apply the water, that it significantly wettens the profile, so that you avoid that specific root development in a very located area, which is not good for your long-term management.
Thank you very much. And here we have a question. Would you be able to explain why for wines of terroir or high quality wines, it's often that soils are chosen which have a slight mineral deficit?
I mean, it's not always the case. Different soils are, I guess, probably optimal for different styles of wine and different varieties of wine grapes. But it is true that in general for red wines, that poorer soils, and it's not just poorer in nutrients per se, but also water, tend to increase the quality of red wines due to various reasons: water deficit, nitrogen deficit.
I'm sure case triggers actually the synthesis of polyphenols. That's one of the main reasons, and reduces the berry size.
So it is true that vines are a little bit they're different than most crop plants, right? Where you're trying to find probably a rich soil and maximize yields and whatnot. A lot of times with wine grapes, you're trying to control vigor. And one of the ways you can control vigor is through having soils, and both with regards to nutrients and water, that aren't as rich.
So in fact, there are several mechanisms involved. So we mentioned already two, which is low water and low nitrogen triggers the synthesis of polyphenols, which is particularly good for red wine production. It reduces the berry size, which generally increases the concentration of your wine, and also it reduces the vigor, so you get a better microclimate around your bunches, more sunlight on your bunches, which also improves the quality. But of course, you get lower yields. So on one hand, with a poor soil, you get lower yields, but generally, in particular for red wine, you get better quality. This is not so much true for white wine, because in white wine, having more polyphenols is not necessarily an advantage. So, generally speaking, you need a little bit more water and nitrogen to produce high-quality whites than to produce high-quality reds.
Okay, thank you very much. And when talking about the hydric state of the soil, there's often a maximum value issued, which is 125 millimeters in. And could you explain that value and what its kind of concrete significance is in the vineyard?
An estimate that they would have 125 milliliters of water. It's an estimate. So, irrigation, I think that's like a maximum water availability, that it would have 125 millimeters.
It's the soil water holding capacity.
Yeah, exactly. So Kay's and I are discussing the question. So I think what the student is asking is, how do you arrive at this 125 millimeters of water, availability, like say at the start of the season after winter, after it's rained? And in reality, that's going to vary a lot depending on the soil. It varies depending on the depth of the soil, the type of the soil, because this changes the water holding capacity of the soil. But oftentimes it's hard to determine that. And so when growers, if they're going to utilize a water balance model to kind of inform irrigation, they'll take some generic number to kind of start them off on what is the water holding capacity. This also takes into account the rooting volume of the vines, so there's a bunch of variability there. But a lot of people, for a generic number that I see here in the question, it's 125, oftentimes they'll say 100. Yeah.
In reality, it can be as variable as a low soil water holding capacity would be 50 millimeters. A very high soil water holding capacity would be 300 millimeters, and so there's that much variability. And even so, the soil water holding capacity depends on the rooting depths. The deeper the roots, the greater the soil water holding capacity. On the texture, silty soils hold a lot of water, and sandy soils hold less water. And in clay soils there is water, but it's not very available. And it depends on the percentage of stones. The more stones, the lower the soil water holding capacity. So these are the three factors that drive soil water holding capacity. Now, as Greg said, it's difficult to measure precisely soil water holding capacity, but still it's good to have a sort of rough idea if your soil water holding capacity is low, medium, or high. In particular, with regard to irrigation requirements, if you have a soil with a high water holding capacity, like for instance in Napa Valley on the valley floor, you can have sometimes more than 200 to 250 millimeters of water. And so that simply means that you need much less irrigation. You can start your irrigation much later in the season. So you can make an estimation of your soil water holding capacity by digging a soil pit. And I think if you plant a vineyard, it's always important to dig a soil pit and to have a rough assessment made of your soil water holding capacity, because that will totally change the water requirements for your irrigation system.
Brilliant, thank you. And it's between floraison and veraison. It's the hydric potential of the plant is noted as minus 0.3 to minus 0.5 megapascals. How is it possible to measure that in the vineyard? What kind of apparatus do you use, and what kind of practices actually go into that measurement?
If you're going to get an exact water status of a vine, the instrument that is always used is a pressure chamber. So in English we call it a pressure chamber, or we call it a pressure bomb. In French it's a champ de pression. And this is a device, I think the students have been introduced to it if they're following the MOOC, but it's connected to a cylinder of gas. It's a little chamber that you can take a leaf and you put the petiole through, you insert it in the chamber, which is then sealed. Okay, and when you detach that leaf, it comes to atmospheric pressure, but when it's connected to the plant, it's under tension because the entire plant's under tension. So the moment you take that off, you put it in a pressure chamber, it comes to atmospheric pressure, and what you do is then you start to increase the pressure in the little chamber, and you look at the petiole for this endpoint, and this is the tricky part of the measurement. You look at that endpoint right up until the point where you see the first trace of water appear, and then you look and say, how much pressure have I applied to see that? And if I applied 35 megapascals of pressure, you knew that you had to apply that much pressure to reach an equilibrium where you see this water. That implies that the leaf was under the opposite pressure, which would mean it was under negative 0.5 megapascals of pressure. And this is how we determine water potential in the plant. You can do this. During the session today, we already talked about pre-dawn water potentials. You can do this anytime. You can do it pre-dawn, before the sun comes up. You can do it at midday. This is the next time that people typically will do it. And then there's one more variation. People will do it either by bagging the leaf or not bagging the leaf. This is kind of a subtle yet important distinction, because if you bag the leaf, you stop transpiration, and then you're measuring what the tension is in the connected cane. We call this a stem water potential. Or if you just leave it unbagged, it's referred to as a leaf water potential. There's newer devices that attempt to measure the water potential in real time, in not just grapevines but other plants, but they are sold, but they're extremely expensive, they're extremely unreliable at this point in time.
No technology.
Yes, they're not, technology is not developed enough for practical application.
So another part of the question was that the water potential is typically between 0.3 and 0.5 megapascal, and this would refer, I suppose, to pre-dawn water potential. In fact, between flowering and the raisin, pre-dawn water potential can vary as much. It can be 0.1 until 1 megapascal. And in fact, when it's written in the course that it is between 0.3 and 0.5, it's a sort of ideal figure, because between 0.3 and 0.5 megapascal in pre-dawn water potential, the vines are experiencing moderate water deficit. So that means that this level of water deficit would slow down the shoot growth, which is actually good for the quality, because then when the shoot growth slows down before veraison, there will be no competition between berry ripening and shoot growth after veraison. And between 0.3 and 0.5, the stress is not so severe that photosynthesis would get impaired. So it's sort of ideal figure where a grower should aim at, in particular if he practices deficit irrigation. So he applies water, but in moderate amounts to let that water deficit develop. 0.3 to 0.5 megapascal before veraison would refer to a sort of ideal water states of the vine in terms of quality management to obtain a high quality crop.
Okay, thank you very much. One last question. Why is it that within AOCs, irrigation is very highly regulated and even forbidden? Why is it judged so necessary to regulate this practice?
Well, I think the case would have something to add, but it's not regulated everywhere, so that's the first thing to remember. So in many French not just French, in many European AOCs, basically, it can be regulated, and this is true in France as well, but in others it's not. And in many global regions, it's not just not regulated, it's totally necessary for viticultural production to be there. So now, as to the origins of this regulation, that's an interesting question.
And I think it's typically a trade-off between quality and quantity. In the same way, in European appellations, the maximum yield per hectare is regulated, which is not the case in many other wine-growing regions across the world. And so excessive irrigation may lead to high levels of yield, which are not necessarily compatible with high quality, in particular in cool climate wine-growing regions. And to some extent, in warmer regions, you can get both the good quality with moderately high yields, but in cool climates, that's not possible. So the regulation in terms of irrigation has a lot to do with the yield regulations. In fact, to avoid people to use too much irrigation water, leading to excessive yields.
It's also interesting now, though, now we move into a context of climate change. The fact of the matter is we don't have, in many regions, enough water to irrigate anyway. So it becomes a natural resource sort of issue, an ecological issue as well. And you see that in California, where, of course, irrigation is not regulated most of the time, yet in certain seasons under drought, the growers don't have enough water to irrigate their fields. So
and what's interesting is today some old world wine-growing regions are opening towards irrigation. For instance, 20 years ago, nobody irrigated Languedoc, and today 15% of the area in Languedoc is irrigated. And 20 years ago in California, 100% or 95% of the growers irrigated. And today you see some very high-quality producers like Harlan Estate and Ridge and Dominus stopping irrigation altogether. So that's an interesting movement, that there's a reduction in irrigation in New World wine-growing regions, in particular because of limited resources, and in Old World wine-growing regions, in some cases, regions opening up the possibility for irrigation in the context of climate change, where in some regions irrigation may become desirable.
Perfect. Thank you very much for your time, professors. That's all we have time for, but I look forward to seeing you next week. And up next is the Live in French. Thank you.